first step you'll do is you'll click the Add New Design button right here. It's going to ask you to name your new template, and for this case, I'm just going to do the display tag. I'm going to go ahead and select the Create Template, and this will launch you into the tag editor or the template editor where you can then begin to design. Now you'll see right here, I've got my document size. You can just modify the width and height and set the unit of preference. You can also turn on and off rulers if you'd like to set up some rulers and drag out guides to help you as you're arranging things. I'm going to turn off the rulers for this sample, but wanted to point that out quickly. Now, the first thing I want to point you to is this little tab right here, which has several presets built in. And for this sample here, I'm going to be working with the preset. I'll show you the basics of how the editor works and how to generate and print your display tags. And then I'll go into very detail and create one from scratch so you can see many of the advanced features of the editor. You can see that from here, I can just select one of the presets and it will load a few of the built-in values that are common for most display tags. We also have a few for certificates and a few things like that that you may need. Now, the first thing you'll note is I'm working in design mode. In design mode is where you'll set up and build your tag and add in all the variable data to your text fields or image fields as you need. You can switch to the preview tab, which will show you every single row of your data that comes from your call, and you can preview what that tag will look like with the new data in place. The third tab is the data tab, and inside of the data tab is where you'll see actually the full data from your call that was submitted from your users. Now, the reason why the data tab is helpful is because you can filter by any one of these specific categories here. For example, let's say I'm in my design and I'm going to switch over here for this sample to the one of the certificate presets here. And when I come into the preview mode, I'm seeing all 31 rows of data. I don't want to generate a certificate for all of the submissions because only a handful will have won awards. So what I can do is I can switch over to the data tab and I can find the award column, and I'm able to filter the data based on many powerful features here. So I can click the filter button right here, and in this case I'm going to filter where it does not equal blank. In other words, show me all of the rows where there is data. And you can see I'm only getting in the rows that are coming back that actually have an award in place. So now when I go back to the preview mode, you'll see that I'm working with filtered data, and it's only going to show me those 4 rows that actually have a value for the award. So now when I generate my print or my PDF, it will only show me those specific 4 rows. I'm going to head back here to the design. I'm actually going to first turn off that filter, so I'll just set this back to the default here, and then switch back to the design mode. And now I'm going to switch back to the default tag to show you how the generation works here. So this tag, of course, is already set up. It's got the submission title. You'll know that this is a variable field because it's blue and has this little underline. That's going to let you know that this will be swapped out for the actual submission title. If you double click this and then highlight the text, you'll see that over here in the properties panel, it's sure enough, it's showing that this text is bound to the title variable. And you can bind colors or you can bind images by clicking on this little variable icon right here whenever you see it in the properties. As soon as you select an element or an item in your canvas in the tag editing area, the properties panel will update and only show you the properties that are relevant to that specific item. Over here on the left, we have the layers panel, and you'll see that there's many different layers that are built in here. You can do groups with Command G, Command Shift G to ungroup, and you can also rearrange these. For example, let's say I place an item in here. I'll come into my shapes category and I'll place one of these preset shapes. I'll just select the star here. I'm going to make this star a different color so we can see it. In fact, I'll just add a big gradient to that so you can see how you can do that. And you can see this star is now on top of the other design elements. Maybe I don't want that, so I need to move it underneath. You can either click and just drag that element down here in the layer stack, and you can see now that I've placed it underneath, it's behind those elements. You can also select an element here and use the keyboard shortcuts of Command bracket on the right or Command bracket left, and that will move it up and down the stacking order as well. I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer. That was just a little sample there, so I'll press the delete key, and that's now gone. So the next step I'll show you is how you can then generate your full print PDF. So once you're happy, you probably want to go ahead and save. You can just click File and Save Template at any time, and that will just save whatever changes you have made in the editor so that if you ever come back, you'll have the latest changes. I'm just going to quickly show you that. So let's say I want the QR code maybe at the bottom, so I'll put this down here at the bottom right, and then I'll say File, Save, And in this case, I'm actually going to leave the editor. So you can just click here and go back to My Templates, or you can just click the ArtCall logo here to switch back to the ArtCall admin. And you can see here's my new template I've created. And just to note, if I go back into the template, so I'm going to go ahead and click View Edit, you'll see the QR code is down there at the bottom because that's the latest save version I have. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and place this back at the top, kind of where I previously had it. And then I'll go ahead and resave just to make sure I'm working with the latest version here. So now I'm going to go ahead and generate the export document. So to do this, we're going to go to the File menu. We're going to go down to the Print/Export Template. I'm going to select this option here, and you'll see there's several options here that are going to be print-based options. Most of the layout grid and the print marks you'll typically leave at default because you want those to show up. But essentially, you're going to choose your paper size. I'll just leave this at the default 8.5 by 11. I can print in portrait or I can print in landscape. And you'll see that you'll specify the margins on the top, right, bottom, and left, depending on which landscape orientation you're in. Now you'll see over here, I'm working with a tag that's 4 inches by 3 inches. So in other words, if I'm working in 8.5 by 11, that's going to leave me 0.25 margins on the left and right, which will give me 8.5. And then 3 tags will fit this way. That's why I've set this to a 1-inch margin on the top and bottom. So essentially I'm filling out the entire page. So now when I go ahead and create the print file, you'll see that it brings me over here, and it will show you a preview of every single page, how that will be generated, that you can then print or export as a PDF. And you'll notice the little teeny tiny crop and cut lines right there in between the tag to aid you with paper cutting. And there's all of the pages generated. Now, one thing I do want to note, and the reason why I'm recording this video inside of Safari, is that currently there's a bug in Safari with printing. So if I go to the File Print, this is typically the next step. You would go to File, then down to Print, and you'll see that it's going to come here with all of your images. You can either print straight from this dialog, or you can just go ahead and save the PDF version by clicking this PDF and saying Save as PDF. Now you'll notice that the margins are slightly off. The top margin is cut off and the bottom margin is much larger than 1 inch. This is a bug in the Safari web browser. That's why if you're using Safari, you will see this message pop up. And we recommend that whenever you're printing, either use Google Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge. So if you would open your print file in one of those browsers, that margin error will be gone and you can print safely or generate your PDF safely. Okay, I'm going to click back here to the designer, and you can see that you can switch these design things however you want. I'm just going to do one more export here, and this time I'm going to switch over to a landscape orientation and go ahead and generate the print file. And you can see, sure enough, I'm now working with a landscape orientation, and the software will intelligently auto-pack every single tag to place them inside the page in a format that fits. Now let's go back one more time. Just to show this one more time, in this case, I'm going to go generate a certificate. So I'm going to come over here to the certificate category. Now the certificate is set up at 11 by 8.5. So this is set up to be a full width page. So now when I go to say File, Export, you'll see that it's giving me 11 by 8.5. I'm in landscape, and the margins are set to 000 because I don't want any margins. My actual page is set to a full page layout. I'll go ahead and generate the print file, and you'll see, sure enough, there's all of my certificates. Now I'm getting more than I need, right? Because I do not have that filter in place. So I'm getting 31 rows instead of just the 4 that actually have the certificates. So when you're going to do something like this, this is where that data comes into play, where I can go data, I can go filter by the award and set that to not equals blank. And now I'm getting those 4. So now when I come back here and I say File and I generate my print document, say Generate Print File, you'll see I'm only getting the 4 rows. I'm using filter data, it lets me know. So now when I print this out, I will only be seeing the 4 certificates that are part of the actual data that's in place here. So that is how you generate and print files. Now the next section of this video is going to be rather lengthy because we're going to overview all of the features and how to actually create one of these certificates from scratch instead of working with a template. So we're going to learn about many of the tools and a few of the presets, some of the advanced features with auto packing, auto sizing text, auto layout, grouping, alignment, all sorts of things. So let's go ahead and get started. Most of you may not need this. You can just work right from a template, but for those of you who want some more advanced things, you can watch this portion. So I'm just going to simply delete all of the content in here. and just start out with a new blank document. You can see I've got a 4x3 set up, so let's go ahead and work with this. And the way I recommend you work in this is design your document as if it was a tag. So let's go in here and I'll just set this up. And so instead of saying new text layer, I would pretend like I'm writing a submission title. So I could say like submission title here, and you want it roughly the same length of what a title would be. You can duplicate layers. I can hit Command D on my keyboard to duplicate a layer down and then keep working along. So that's going to be my submission title. Maybe this is going to be the user first name, and then the last name will come in next. So I'll add that here. Let's duplicate one more. I'll come down here, and maybe this is going to be the category, and then also maybe I'm going to have the submission ID. So I'll do a pipe symbol, and then I'll say the ID. Okay, I'll duplicate one more time, Command D, and then this one maybe I want to do as the sale price. So I'll just call this the sale price. So you could either type it out like this, sale price, or you could just type it in like a number, 455, something like that. So I'm actually going to do a number. I'm going to prefix that with a $sign, and then do something like that. And that's looking okay there. So we'll just keep those there for just a second. And then let's kind of rearrange these. So I'll kind of pull these over here to the left. Of course, you can rename your layers if you want. So you can double click these and have them match up to the actual names here. So maybe you want to rename these just for your visual clutter. I'll call this one my submission title. So just simply double click the layer name and you can rename these as you need. So I'm not going to go through each of those, but that's how you can do that. All right, let's go ahead and add a QR code. So the QR code is up here. This is the QR code button here. So I'll just select this and I'll just place in a QR code here and select it. And you can see that the QR code has a content property right here. So if you just have a single, if the tag is just going to go to a single web address, you can just paste the content in right here. So I can say http://example.com we'll say, and you can see the QR code automatically adjusts. You can always play with the color of the QR code if you need for the foreground and background as well. However, for this example, I want the QR code to go to the submission detail view, right? That's on the web gallery. You can scan and check in artworks with that. So the QR code has many features within our system. So I need to link this to the QR code that's in the data. So I'm going to select my QR code and select the variable binding button. So I'll select this, and it will automatically detect if you have a QR code in your data, which we do. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the QR code URL. And now you can see that that's going to have that turn a little light blue, which lets me know it's now bound. So now when I go to the preview, it should switch for every single data row. You can see it's changing. And I recommend, always double check, get your phone out, scan that QR code, and make sure it's going to the correct URL before you print out all of your tags for your display labels. So let's come over here and I'll head back here. So that's how you can work with a QR code. Let's go ahead and now set up some variable data on the actual text. So this is the submission title. So I'm going to just add a few properties here. I'm going to change the font. There's over 1,500 fonts you can now choose from. So I'll just select a few at random here so you can kind of see how those properties work. I'll switch that font there. I'll come up here. You can increase the size of the font. You can make the italics, bold italics, all of the typography properties here as well. You can also play with letter spacing, line height, and many other typographic properties. So I'm going to set that to there, and then I'm also just going to set this to uppercase. So I'll make all of my titles uppercase, and you can see you can do that. You can do lowercase, capitalized, or normal casing is however the casing was originally. All right, so let's leave that there. That's looking okay. Let's come into the first name. So I'm just going to highlight, in this specific one, I'm going to highlight the first text node, which is the first name, and I'll change that to be the first name. So I'm going to bind that little piece of text to the first name variable. And I'll bind this little piece of text here to the last name variable. And I got ahead of myself. I didn't even bind the submission title. So let's go ahead and select the submission title, and I'll bind that to the title. And now all three of those are going to be dynamic. So let's just preview this so you can see that's going to be swapped out. And the chain, there we go. It's moving through all those like it's supposed to. And that's great. I've got my filter turned on. So I'm actually going to go turn off the award filter so we can see all of the rows. And let's head back here to the preview. And now I can cycle through that and make sure that's working how it's supposed to. And that's great. Perfect. Now, one advanced feature here is because I have the submission title, you have a few options of laying this out. You'll see right now I have this set to the size mode is auto width. So depending on the length of text, if it's variable, it will just keep going horizontally forever. But I don't want my text to ever run underneath this QR code. For example, if I come into the preview, let's find the one that has a little bit longer text. There's probably one in here, maybe, yeah, there we go. So this particular one right now, you can see the hat for a horse race, it's too big for its area. And if I leave it to the auto width, it will just keep going. However, I can set it to a fixed width. So when you set it to a fixed width, essentially our program is now smart enough to automatically resize the text based on its size to fit within this bound. So now when I come over here to the preview, you'll see that as I cycle through these, anything that's slightly longer, I should have paid attention to what number that one was. There we go. So there's the hat for a horse race, and see how it's automatically scaled down in type size, so it's not going to overflow its bounds. That's a really powerful feature. Now the other option you have here is auto height. Now auto height is even a little more advanced. So if I set it to auto height, you can specify the width. So I'm just going to drag this out. So essentially I'm saying you can get this wide, and if you get more than this wide, you're going to break down to a new line. That's how auto height works. So let's go check this out now. So over here on preview mode, let's go through these, and we should see one that's going to break down to a new line. Did I skip it? There we go. So you can see a hat for a horse race just broke down to a new line because I have auto width. You can also set a max height. So for example, I don't want this to go 3 lines because then it would break underneath this one. So I can select this, set it to auto height, and then I can turn on a max height, and you'll see this little bar up here that's going to tell you the maximum height that this is allowed to overflow on. So if I set it to right here, it will roll a line, but it will never allow it to grow bigger than that single line. So you can always set a max height on those as well. So that's kind of a little more advanced, but that's really helpful when you're setting up things that you don't want to overflow. Let's go ahead and finish binding these. So I'm going to set this category to the category, and we'll set the ID to the ID. So let's come over here and set this ID to an ID. That's going to be the submission ID. And then we'll set this to the sale price. So I'll leave the $sign and just set this here to the sale price. And there we go. I'll set that to the sale price. And then let's go ahead and preview and make sure all those are swapping out how we expect that to behave. Great. That's now looking great here. And wonderful. Okay. So now let's look at grouping. Because I have several different options, and what if my first name and my last name, let's say I set this to the auto height as well, and I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Let's say first name and last name is going to wrap in some instances, and I actually don't know if I have one that will wrap, so maybe I will shrink that down. Let's actually do that. Let's take this and shrink it down. So we're going to force that to wrap over here. And now when I come to my preview, you can see that those two are going to wrap lines. And now I'm getting into this problem where this element is now bumping up into this element, and they're all going to kind of overlap depending on what sort of dynamic content ends up coming in. You can see there is a little couple of problems right inside of here. So that one's going too big and you're just running into issues. So in this circumstance, what we can do is we can group all of these elements into an auto layout group. And this is another advanced feature. But if I select all of the elements that belong to this specific chunk of text, I'm going to go ahead and group these. So that's Command G on the keyboard, and I've grouped all those into a single group. And I'm going to resize the group here and just place this group sizing something that makes sense to me. I'll leave the QR code for right now outside of the group. And right now it's set to fixed, but I want to actually switch this to auto. So auto grouping is going to automatically lay the elements out inside of the group. And this is the way this works. When you have auto set up, I can set all these elements to align to a specific edge, the center, the top, right, bottom, left, so I can align these however I want. And I can also increase the gap in between the individual elements. So the gap is sort of like the spacing between each one of those layers. So I'm just going to set this back down to right here. And now the benefit of an auto layout group is if the top layer wraps lines, it's going to push the other elements down. So I'll make this auto layout group kind of go from top to bottom like this. And then you'll see how this works when I switch over to the preview. So let's come over into preview. And whoops, I accidentally clicked off of that. Let's set that back up in there. I moved that on accident. There we go. Let's come back into the preview. And now you can see as those elements wrap, things are just getting automatically pushed down and automatically adjusting based on the height of the content. There was the one that got wrapped down to 2 lines and slightly resized. And now everything sort of automatically adjusts, so you don't run into the issue of having things get cut off. So that's another powerful feature, the auto layout group inside of a group where you can lay things out on the horizontal or vertical axis. So you can actually do either axis if you want. And then you can also use this button right here, which will auto distribute. So if I click on this one, it's going to auto distribute the space in between each element to be equal. You can just click back in here if you want to turn that back off. Okay, that's auto layout in groups. Now you can absolutely place groups inside of groups and auto layout things in all sorts of advanced ways to create a tag that automatically reflows and shrinks according to many varying needs. The last thing I'm going to show you here is how to work with images, because there's quite a few powerful features with those as well. So inside of the image tool, you can go ahead and select that from up here. And all of your call uploads will appear here. So if you've uploaded some images, maybe your logo, and you want to have that logo as part of your tag, you can just select that, place that over here, and then that will be part of now every single tag as well. We also have an image search. So if you come over here, to the image panel here, you can come over to the image search and you can type for any sort of thing over here. Maybe I want a background that's of some trees. I'll just do this as a sample here. And you can see this uses a service called Pixabay to find images, and I can just click one of those images, bring that over into your design, and go right ahead and start working there. If you're working on templates, a lot of times it makes sense in your design to do an image search that's either an illustration or a vector. So maybe I want to search for a divider, and I'm going to, divider. And I'm going to come over and look at illustrations. And you can see there's all sorts of fancy little illustrations or vector artwork here. So maybe I want to pull out this divider here, add that into my project, and then place that somewhere in my tag for a little bit more ornate design. There's many images you can search for. I'm going to show you lastly how you can deal with images specifically for your call, so submission images. So I'm going to go ahead and click the image button again, but this time I'm going to load in the placeholder image. So I'll select the placeholder image and I'll just place this over here. For now, I'll shrink this down a little bit. You can hold down Shift on your keyboard to constrain proportions, or let go of Shift will allow you to do any sort of design like this. So I'll place an image, and now this is just a placeholder. So I need to bind this image to a variable, just like we did before. And you'll see the bind option over here. I'm going to go ahead and click the bind option, and you'll see there's a few options. I can do the main image medium, which is probably most of you will do, or I can do the profile image if the user has a profile. I'm going to go ahead and select the main image here for the example. And so now that is bound to the main image. So now when I come into the preview mode, you can see that this is going to be the submission image for each one of these individual submissions. So you can include those as well directly inside of the tag as needed. Now, when you're adding an image to your submission, there's a few different options you can set for the fill. So you can see right now this particular element has a fill that's set to an image. So if I click on this, you can either fill shapes with solid colors, with gradients, or with images. And when you have an image set, you can change it between fit, fill, and crop. And right now it's set to fit. And the way this works is actually a little bit easier to show you on a non-placeholder image. So I'm actually going to load up just some image over here so we can see this. Let's just do the hot air balloon here. And I'll drag this down and shrink it a little bit so you can see here in the canvas. I'm actually going to zoom in one click. Whoops, wrong button here. I'm clicking a little bit here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take care of this image. And right now you can see that this guy is set to fill. Okay, what fill means is whatever width and height you specify your image to be, it will automatically adjust and fill up that space and crop out the image that's out of bounds if it's not the same aspect ratio of your image. So this is the way that fit works. If I switch it to fit, sorry, I said that backwards, that's fill. If I switch it to fit, then however size you put here, it will automatically resize the image, but you will always see the full image depending on its aspect ratio. So for submission images, it's typically better to set this to the fit category. That way, all of your preview images over here will always show the full size image and not part of the image. So you can see, well, I guess I didn't bind that, but let's go ahead and rebind this. So I've got that set to a square, and let's go rebind this to the main image again. Now let's go preview, and you can see that it's always going to show the full image within that box. Okay, so that's kind of how the options work on there. You can switch this to crop as well. So if you need to crop, you can actually set this to crop, and you can take this image and resize it and scale it within that area however you want if you need to crop out an image for any specific reason. And you can also set an image to repeat. And if an image is set to repeat, it will just tile indefinitely within the area like this. Okay, let's go ahead and delete that image. That is the basics of how the images work. Next, I'm going to show you how the basics of the pen tool work. So occasionally you'll need to create custom shapes or graphics. So if you go ahead and get the pen tool, you can come over here and just click. And if I click and hold the mouse button, those of you that are familiar with image editing software will recognize these Bezier handles. But you can create any sort of shape you want with the pen tool. I'll go ahead and finish this path off right there and then say finish path. And then I can fill that shape with a solid color. So I can fill that with a color. I can switch over to a gradient and play with the gradient. We support radial gradients as well. So we can do radial gradients, color stops, all those sort of common features you have. I can also set the stroke. So I can increase the stroke color. I can make the stroke a color. I can make the stroke a gradient. We even have options in the stroke over here where you can set it to a dashed or a solid stroke, and a few other little options here that are advanced as well. So that is the basics of working with fills. You can also fill this with a image fill. So if I wanted to fill that shape, I could come over to the image, say choose image, and go over here to the search. I'll just place an image here. And you can see now that is sort of cropped out or masked out where the image is acting as the background of that specific shape as well. Okay, that is how the pen tool works. Next, I'll look at the shapes. So we have a few basic, what we call primitive shapes built in, and then just several presets that may be interesting to use in your designs. So you can start out with a star, and you can see that the star, I can modify the amount of points on the star. I can modify the radius of the star, or adjust its pointiness, so to speak, on how I want that to look. You can switch this over here to the rectangle. I can switch it to a circle. I can switch it to a polygon. Polygon, you can adjust the amount of sides, and then I can also do a line. So if you switch to a line, we need to make sure we have our stroke. You can also adjust the end caps to be arrows or square, or a few features like this to make your lines. So that is shapes. There's also the preset shapes in here that you can click and add. So maybe I want to add over here maybe a bit of a blob. And I can place this over here and then fill this with some sort of gradient and maybe add that as a background effect on my site. Maybe that kind of goes out of bounds like this. And of course, I'd want this on the layer stack, so I need to kind of regroup this to put it underneath the QR code and rearrange those a little bit. And you can kind of do something like that. So you have custom vector shapes. If you double click one of the shapes, it will take you into the path editing mode where you can actually come in and fine tune the path and adjust this however you want. So you can play around with those shapes and create some really interesting designs. Okay, that is the basics of most of the tools. The last thing I'll show you, I know this is the 5th time I've said the last thing I'll show you, but one of the advanced features that may come into play if you want to do an advanced tag is the ability to have type on a path. Now I'm going to delete all the work I just did here because I want to start out with the blank canvas to illustrate this. So let's go ahead and create a path first. Now for this, I'm going to use one of the built-in shapes. So I'll come over here and I'm just going to pick this little squiggly line here to show you this. So I'll place this down here. You could, of course, always come in and do your own path as well if you need, but I'll just do the built-in one here. And next I'm going to go ahead and get my text and just say sample text layer. And I'm going to assign some variables to this. So let's go ahead and assign a variable to this. I'll make this maybe the first name. And then I'll make this next piece right here the last name. And then maybe we'll add some flair to it. So let's go ahead and colorize some of these nodes. So I'll make this one red. And let's adjust the typography a little bit on this as well. So I'll come up here and just find something that's slightly more interesting than those. So maybe we'll set this to this font. Whoops, that one didn't load correctly. Let's try, there we go. And let's increase the size here a little bit so we can see that a bit better. Maybe make it like that. There we go. Let's go ahead and adjust this node. And I'm just kind of playing around here. Maybe we'll make this one a gradient fill instead. And on this guy over here, let's maybe give this guy a stroke. So we'll set this guy to have a bit of a stroke and short, something like that. Now what we can do is I can actually assign this text layer to flow along this path. So if I drag and hold down the Option key, you'll see it's going to give me a little dashed border when I get on top of this path. And if I let go at this point, it will bind that down to the path, and the path disappears. And because these are variables, now when I come over to the preview, you can see how that actually flows in along the path. So the idea here is that you can actually do text on a path, is how this is known, and have dynamic data that flows on text on path as well. You can always double click here. You can actually edit the way that the text flows on a path layer. So you can see we can kind of adjust this start offset or the ending offset here. We can adjust the anchor to be the start or the end or the middle, and there's a few properties on how that text will flow. So that's a little bit more of an advanced feature if you want to work with text on path.